I'm speaking today with Sean Murphy, all about the history of Christmas and its celebration in Ireland. Sean will be joining us live online to give this program on Monday, December 7th, starting at 7 o'clock. The program will be live on Zoom and will also be live streamed on Facebook and YouTube. Just look for the library, the Thomas Green Library, on either of those channels, and you'll find us and be able to join us. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Sean. Sean, thank you so much for joining me today. It's a great pleasure and honor to see you and spend some time with you again.
Great. Thank you, Clayton. And I'm delighted to be able to meet again and meet with your guests and talk about something that's seasonal and historical.
Yes. It is both. It is here in the wintertime. I know that people have been celebrating Christmas in Ireland for a long time, but I know from talking to other people that sometimes there's some very different traditions in Ireland. So I'm very interested in kind of what you're going to bring to this conversation to help ground us in history and traditions, which especially this year are super, things feel very strange. And so we try to remember which of those traditions we can continue in this new state that we're living in.
Yeah, sure. What I'm going to be doing, a part of it will be, to introduce people to what Christmas is like today in Ireland. But because it's so similar to what it is here, I'm not going to spend too much time. There are a few things that are a bit different, and then I'll also be playing some videos, some music with people celebrating. Mm-hmm. And some nice music. A lot of it will be to look at the origins of Christmas, how it developed, and to look also at some of the divisions within the Christian church. From in the beginning rejecting any notion of celebrating the birth of Christ, because that was a pagan tradition. Mm-hmm. Seen by early Christians as the worst possible thing to do, basically idolatry.
Right.
But again, after the Romans adopted the Catholic Church, which was just one of a number of streams within Christianity. It just happened to be located in Rome. So they adopted Christianity as the official religion, and that was their move away from paganism. So you can imagine, as a result of that, there are a huge number of traditions that entered Christianity, which were part of pagan Rome. Mm-hmm. So I'll be introducing people to all of those. I'm also looking at the Celtic traditions, because that's the other main European tradition that's there. So we get some of the things that we do come from the Roman pagan tradition. Some come from the Celtic pagan tradition, and then there are some which come from Ireland itself. And then you had a situation where some traditions were taken on board straight away, because you can imagine in the early days, Christians who were being persecuted did not want to be seen as different to the pagans.
Right.
So one way to secure your life was to adopt many of the pagan traditions, so that at a glance it didn't look as if you were doing something else. The last thing you would want to do is to start having a celebration that was so startlingly different that it invited retaliation and even more persecution against you.
That's a fascinating spin. I often think of, when I think of, Christmas trees, for example, I think of them as co-opting, and I don't know if there's anything to this or not, but I think of them as kind of taking a tradition of, bringing the trees and celebrating nature and kind of pasting it onto a Christian holiday, the birth of Jesus Christ. And I've always wondered that's a very interesting spin of, instead of pasting it on, of assuming it and making it a Christian, or finding a way to celebrate their own Christian heritage, but doing it in a kind of a, I don't know, maybe it's because I've lived in such Christian dominant communities for so long that it's hard to remember a time when Christians had to hide it and mask it as something else. That's very interesting.
So, and the other thing, of course, is that most people do not believe that Christ's birth was, in December. So the reality is that the old pagan traditions, were the strongest, the ones where you celebrated the equinoxes.
Like all cultures, you celebrate light when you need it the most, and it's dark. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll be explaining to people essentially that rather than try to compete directly with with that, they adopted a time that fitted in with the old calendars. Now, granted, the other thing to be kept in mind is that, January the 1st, we take as our start of our year. That's a relatively recent thing. Most people did not start the year, with January the 1st until, recent times. And certainly at the time of Christ, there would have been no notion of January the 1st being the start of a new year. Didn't make any sense because they were practical people. The year started with the work. And of course, the other thing about Christmas trees and that, and of course, the interpretation of Christmas, a lot of it is with second sight, and a lot of it is trying to put a narrative which may or may not have anything to do with what the reality was. So probably what happened was that in December there were very few things that were green around the place. So it wasn't that there were special powers associated with these things. They just happened to be on things that look good. And red berries in December, we'll take
it's beautiful. That's right.
pretty. So a lot of the narratives that are around them, were probably generated partly as a way of telling stories and creating imagery. And may themselves at some point then, because sometimes they get then taken into a context which often then is used to suggest an earlier origin, to what really went on than what it was.
Sure.
And then I'll be looking at the emergence of the kind of Christmas itself, and the different parts of that, and the early experiments with Christmas that went on literally up to the 17th century, because there were some strange practices, say, that followed through from Rome, where you had things like, for at that time of the year, for instance, children would be allowed to rule the house, and in some cases the slaves would be allowed to rule the house, but that got and there was a kind of a festival of fools was the way they looked at it, turning the world upside down. Why they did that, obviously no one really knows. It was there's all sorts of suggestions, but anyway, that continued. Then I explored the origins. For instance, how Saint Nicholas became Santa Claus,
Right.
how his actual date of remembrance and the Thanksgiving that he's, was associated with, suddenly everything got transferred from the early December till the end of December. And no one pays any, attention, to it. Then I looked.
Do they celebrate Christmas on the same days? I know I have Dutch friends who have a lot of different days they celebrate, and there's people who celebrate, in other cultures, the coming of the kings, when that happens. There's certain dates in different countries that have more significance than we're used to in this country, at least, or in the traditions that I'm familiar with.
Yeah, there is. I don't go into that in any detail because, again, I'm limited in the time. But the 12 days of Christmas, that mirrors a festival, and a tradition that went way back. I introduced, there's some new concepts like, Little Christmas and Women's Christmas. There doesn't seem to be a parallel with that in ancient times, although there probably is, because it's hard to explain how in the Christian world that women would have become elevated to the level that they were in pre-Christian societies to be given a day, although I suppose it's Little Christmas, but
Sean, you said something a minute ago that I can't get out of my head. You mentioned a time when children were allowed to rule, and when slaves were allowed to rule the household. And I assume you were still talking in Ireland. I'm not very familiar.
No. This would have been this would have been in Rome.
In Rome. Oh, okay,
yeah,
sure.
Yeah. In Rome, it was more a Roman tradition.
Okay.
I don't believe it was a Celtic tradition.
Okay, because
it would have been slaves. I mean, there were slaves in Ireland that time as well.
Were there? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there were slaves in Ireland. The slave period kind of came to an end probably in the 1 or 2 centuries after St. Patrick and after the Brehon laws were rewritten. There were certain practices, which were gotten rid of. Then it came back then when the Vikings invaded Ireland, because the Vikings were the leading slave traders, and the initial wealth of the Viking world was built upon slaves, either trading, taxing them, and then using them to do work. And then it wasn't until the Normans came in, then the Normans were the first to begin to, make some move against the slave trade. But it wasn't until, the early 17th or 18th century that the British eventually brought an end to slavery. But that was really to try to impact the southern colonies here.
Okay. Well, that's obviously a different story than we're getting into on this program, but I couldn't let it pass because it was just, it stuck in my mind there for a moment. But we can obviously go to that at another time. So I know that you've embellished. We had a wonderful program with you where we talked about kind of the history of survival and just some of the wonderful art and culture and comedy and music from Ireland. I think a lot of people, when they think of winter and Irish traditions, music comes to mind as well. I wonder if we're going to have the joy of any what you're planning on sharing during this program.
Sure, I'm going to be showing some carol singing. Kind of mass carol singing. Huge crowds of people.
Lovely.
Outdoors. Singing. And I've also a few famous clips then of, some famous singers, singing the old Irish songs like Christmas in Killarney, that kind of Blarney. I have that. But the most famous song from Ireland, I suppose, I remember it's going back a good few years ago, but I remember one year they had a national vote, through radio, on the best Christmas song, and the one that was voted was the Pogues' "Christmas in New York."
Well, it's hard to go wrong if you're, enjoying the Pogues. I do have to admit a fondness for them myself. Mine was always lend me £5 and I'll buy you a drink, but it doesn't quite have the Christmas era. Yeah.
So it's and then what I'm doing as well. Then I have a bigger version of this, which is a 2-week course, which I will be doing in December on Zoom.
Okay.
So for those who can't get the fuller course, this will give a good summary of it.
A nice little taste. Yes.
Yeah.
How have your courses been going? You're getting good attendance?
Yeah, and I'm expanding all of the time. I'm now had people in about 5 states.
Wonderful.
Unfortunately, a lot of the Irish and Irish American clubs haven't reopened yet. Sure. And they're not active. So, my attempts to get into places like, Wisconsin and, Illinois haven't worked out as yet. But I'm hopeful as soon as they get back to, their regular routines that I'll be able to do so. Yeah. So
they've certainly, some of those Midwestern states have been seriously impacted by the pandemic recently. So I hope that they're staying safe. How are people doing? How are people surviving the pandemic in Ireland? Are you in contact with anyone there right now, or you've been watching the stats?
Yes, I'm in contact, regularly, and it's pretty tough. But again, there's a bit of what's going on here, but it's very, very marginal. You have had a few people early on take the government, to court. Over its, the implementation of the guidelines, and again, some of that was done just to test, the constitutionality, but it's not. We're not like England and here. Most people know that there's a problem and are willing to take
action to protect themselves.
Yeah.
and people.
The problem is, for some people, there's it's too much overreach. You can only go 2 miles away from your home. they've been very quick, to close pubs and restaurants if there were outbreaks. Contact tracing was done on a much more strategic level than here. Literally here, strategic, planning of that sort was seen as leading inevitably, to the close of the economy, which had to be avoided at all costs. Whereas, in Ireland, at one level, what they're doing now, they've closed down now in the hope that people will have a Christmas.
Okay.
Because if they didn't close down for this time of the year, and of course, there's no Thanksgiving in Ireland, so it's not the same, effect. But right now, there's a major close down simply to ensure that, if you control it for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, well, then you won't have the same spread at Christmas. Whereas if you left it run rife now, because there's really no way that people are going to be able to declare Christmas a total no-go area.
Yeah.
And they don't want to do that.
Well, I know here a lot of our regular Christmas traditions have been seriously scaled back. In Quincy, they're putting up displays, but they're not doing. I don't know if you're familiar in Quincy. There's the annual Santa jump where Santa Claus jumps out of a plane and makes a descent, a very celebrated arrival. And there's all sorts of pageantry. There's, schools have, traditionally have holiday concerts. We've hosted in there in the library, and all of those are on pause this year. So I'm grateful that you can bring some history, that we can bring some light. I'm glad that we can do it for all of our friends, so that whether or not you have ever celebrated Christmas, there's something here where we can learn about how people have celebrated and how different cultures have come together, and just kind of historical perspective. And for people who do celebrate Christmas, hopefully this will bring them some joy and a little perspective as we go through these hard times.
Yeah, because for instance, in Ireland, one of the benefits of a historical perspective is that all of the people who today, who understanding their history and having a desire, to make sure that we don't lose our history, tended to be seen as very kind of marginal creatures, because people didn't understand, why they were celebrating various old pagan festivals. Mm-hmm. Now, in some cases, what's happened is that commercialism has taken over. So some of the celebrations of the pagan festival now attract a lot of people because they moved from being the preoccupation of a small kind of group of people to somebody seeing dollar signs and euro signs. But when people understand the continuity and the connections within history, and don't see it in terms of committing a big sin or something, to be recognizing, understanding, and celebrating the totality of our history rather than just the Christian history. Mm-hmm. Because they're all, and that's what I'm trying to do here, is to show the interconnectedness in one sense, so that to understand and appreciate the interconnections does not and should not in any way be a weight, to be used against you in terms of your Christian beliefs.
Absolutely. I certainly, we're not trying to weigh anyone down. We're trying to just share the commonalities and how we've all persisted and people that survived together. Because
that's one of the, the lessons from our history. Like when Christianity took off in Ireland, and when we had 3 or 4 centuries in which Ireland was was having a renaissance, when mm-hmm. it was the printing house of the world, literally. Mm-hmm. They were scribing not just the Gospels, but they were scribing the old Greek classics mm-hmm. and the old Roman classics, in total disregard for the kind of the Christian tradition of destroying everything. They did not want, they saw value in these and persisted in improving them. And that was one of the contributions, again, that's important to understand, that they saw the connection, and the connection was real, and they demonstrated that in their work.
Right.
And without a lot of that, there's a lot of texts in the world today that we wouldn't have. A lot of scholarly works from the Greek period, particularly. The Roman works probably would have managed to survive, but a lot of the Greek works, maybe not.
I know a lot of those ancient works survived. That's fascinating to hear about the work in Ireland. I know that in the Middle East there was a great tradition. A lot of times people will take issue with Islam, but similarly, there were Islamic scholars that preserved some of those ancient classical works as well.
Oh yeah,
These are great lessons to remind ourselves of. If we work on preserving and telling the stories rather than pretending they didn't exist,
yeah.
we'll be wiser. So.
Okay, well, listen, thank you,
Thank
and
you
I
so
would,
much, Sean.
yeah, I would see you in a few days, I suppose, at this stage.
Yes, I will see you soon.
Okay,
Take care, Sean.
thanks,
Happy
Dave.
holidays. Thank you.
Okay,
Bye bye.
bye now.
I've been speaking just now with Sean Murphy, who will be presenting a program for us here at the library on the history of Christmas and its celebration in Ireland. That program is happening on Monday evening, December 7th, starting at 7 o'clock. It will be live on Zoom and simulcast on both the library's YouTube and Facebook channels. I hope you'll join us.